Hi guys, and welcome to my channel, I guess. My name is Elena, and this is my leopard gecko Spot. And yeah, I guess just welcome. So this is basically going to be a channel all about just the overall information on leopard geckos, just answering any questions that anybody has. And I wanted to make my first video just a basic overall just kind of care guide. It's just going to cover the basics, and it's going to zoom in a little bit on the areas that I feel need to be talked about and aren't talked about enough in the reptile community. Now I'm probably just going to have Spot out for the first little bit of the video, and then he might make a few appearances later on in the video. But he's actually only about a year old. I got him November 11th of 2020, and he was around 6 to 8 months when I got him, and so he's still just a little bit hyper and a little bit skittish, so I'm probably going to put him back pretty shortly. Right now he's kind of splooting on me, and I'm sitting beside his tank, which is right there. Please ignore my little phone light in the background reflecting off of his tank. So I just wanted to show you guys a few pictures of Spot. This is him when I first got him, and then this is him just a little bit older, and then this one is him just a little bit older than that, and then this is one of the most recent ones that I took of Spot. Okay, so before I get into what leopard geckos are and how to care for them, I wanted to just show you guys a few pictures of other different ages and colors or morphs of leopard geckos. Okay, so this is just a pretty typical pattern of a leopard gecko, and so is this guy, and hopefully this gives you guys a little bit of an idea of what other leopard geckos look like other than just Spot. So now that you guys have a good idea of what leopard geckos look like, let's get into the good stuff. The leopard gecko is actually a type of gecko that is native to rocky grasslands, that are mostly located in the Middle East. And these grasslands are typically arid environments, which means they are dry with little humidity. The leopard gecko's Latin name is Eubulus or Eubultharis, I'm pretty sure Macularius. Please don't quote me on that. I'm not very good at pronouncing Latin names. But I know that that translates to the true eyelid. And this is because leopard geckos have eyelids. I don't know if you'll be able to tell, but Spot will definitely blink sometimes, and he'll like wink at you occasionally. I don't know, he doesn't do it very much, but they definitely do use their eyelids quite a bit. So often leopard geckos are referred to as beginner pets because of their tameability and size, and also ability to withstand a lot. Now, when I say this, I mean that they can withstand a lot without dying, but not while living a comfortable life. So many breeders and reptile shops will classify leopard geckos as easy reptiles, and I don't quite agree with this. There are many reasons for this, but the main one is that they are less work than other reptiles, but that does not mean that they don't require lots of care. Alright, so I'm going to put Spot away in just a little bit, but first I wanted to talk about diet. So leopard geckos are insectivores, which means they only eat insects. Now you may see bearded dragons or other lizards eating fruits and vegetables and think it is okay to give to your leopard gecko, but it is not. They cannot digest fruits and vegetables, so please don't give them to your leopard gecko. This is like super important because they cannot digest them. And so, yeah, sorry, he's beginning his exploring for the night. He does that a lot. He'll just climb up my arm. All right. So leopard geckos eat insects in both the wild and captivity. So by feeding a leopard gecko insects, you are mimicking how they would be in the wild. So I'm gonna put this little guy away for now because I can sense that he's getting a little bit nervous. But I'll be back in a minute just to talk more about diet. All right, I'm back. So the main insects that I've seen people feed their leopard geckos are mealworms, dubia roaches, and crickets. Also, people will feed their leopard geckos waxworms, and these are not a staple diet food, but I'll get into that a little bit later. So I'm going to talk more about feeding, like I said, later on in the video. So this was just basically an overview, just kind of get used to the idea of feeding, I guess. All right, so I've used the word morph already, and if you're new to reptiles, you're probably very confused. Morphs are different colors and patterns on leopard geckos. The morph of a leopard gecko is based on its genetics, and breeders will often breed two leopard geckos of the same or different morph to create a leopard gecko that is visually pleasing. So this may mean a specific pattern or color, it may mean vibrance or even patternless. There are many different types of morphs. So here are some examples of some different morphs. Morphs can be more simple, such as the normal pattern, which I believe is the first guy that you see in the upper left-hand corner, or more extreme, such as this guy. All right, so enigmas are another morph of leopard gecko. This morph is pretty special as leopard geckos who are enigmas have enigma syndrome, which is a neurological disorder, but don't worry if you don't know what that is. I'm, of course, going to get into that much later in the video. Okay, so that was a lot of information. Good news is I only have one more thing to cover before we get into care. That is the anatomy. A leopard gecko's external and internal anatomy is one of the biggest things that sets it apart from other geckos. You've probably heard that a leopard gecko can drop its tail. This can be a deal breaker for some people when it comes to getting a reptile. Yes, leopard geckos can drop their tail, but it only happens under certain circumstances. For example, if a small child pinched the tail, or if the leopard gecko got the tail stuck in something, or if the leopard gecko was extremely stressed or ill. Spot does not really mind it when I touch his tail. It's not a huge deal for him. If a leopard gecko does drop its tail, which looks like this, it does regrow. Although a regrown tail, which looks like this, may never look the same as the original tail, it does do the same thing that the original tail does, which is essentially storing fat. So unlike many other geckos, the leopard gecko does not have sticky feet, leaving them unable to climb surfaces like glass. So other geckos that can do this are the Jehua gecko and the crested gecko. You may have heard of a couple of other different types of geckos that can climb glass, but leopard geckos cannot. Instead of sticky feet, the leopard gecko actually has tiny toenails. And this allows them to grip their flooring easier and allows them to be able to climb up textured surfaces better. And also watch out for those foam backgrounds because many leopard geckos love to climb them. Okay, so I just said leopard geckos can't climb, but they love to climb. I mean, both of these are kind of true in a way. Let me try to explain this really fast. While leopard geckos cannot climb surfaces such as glass, they can climb other surfaces such as foam and bark and other surfaces that are made of materials that they can dig their fingernails into or hold onto. Now, it may seem like a good idea to let your little guy climb to its heart's content, but it can be extremely dangerous, especially for babies. A fall from even a few inches up can be deadly for a leopard gecko. Because of their size and internal anatomy, they're susceptible to injuries such as internal bleeding and brain injuries. Sometimes leopard geckos are way too ambitious and climb things that they can't get down from. I removed so much decor from Spot's tank because it was dangerous for him. I actually just recently remodeled his tank and got him some lower hides and some decor that can just be like on the ground and on surface level, but I've had to remove so much, and it used to look very bare in there because it started off with a great setup with a bunch of different decorations and hides, and then I realized he can climb them and get way too high and can potentially actually fall and get injured. Alright, so I'm going to tell you guys one last thing about leopard gecko anatomy, and I don't want you to be alarmed, okay? I was super surprised when I learned that leopard geckos actually have teeth. They're super tiny and not a problem at all for the most part. It would have to be a super strange situation for a leopard gecko to bite a human. Remember guys, leopard geckos are prey. When they feel threatened, they are most likely going to run away to hide somewhere. Now, Spot has bitten me a couple of times, but it's just been accidental. For example, when I was feeding him, which I'll get into later on in the video, sometimes I'll have my hand like this and he'll get some of the skin on my hand, or just a couple other times when he's been feeding and he's mistaken my hand for food. But he's never bitten me outside of just mistaking my hand for food. So if your leopard gecko does bite you, which is extremely unlikely, it will not hurt very much at all. The only way that I can describe it to you is like rubbing your hand against a brick wall. Now, this may seem super strange, but I heard it from someone. I was like, that's not going to be real. That's not what it's going to feel like. And then I realized, wow, that actually does feel a lot like it. It just feels like their teeth are kind of bricks and it feels all sandpapery. It feels weird, but it doesn't hurt that much at all. Alright, so that was a lot of information, but I have some good news for you. I am all done talking about the basics, so let's get into the care. Just a quick PS, I guess, at the end of that little section. I just wanted to add that leopard geckos also shed. Now, there is lots of information about this elsewhere on the internet that you can easily find, but sometimes leopard geckos, when they're shedding, which I've actually never seen Spot shed, he does it at night times, so I basically don't see him at all, and he does a really good job getting all of his shed off, and so I don't really have to, he's running back into his hide, but I don't really have to mess around with that at all. But sometimes leopard geckos will get stuck shed around their finger, around I guess the little toes, and their tail at the base and at the tip, and sometimes they'll get it on their eyelids and just other places as well. So sometimes they'll need a little bit of help getting that off, and there are many other places that you guys can check out that have that information, but I haven't had very much experience at all, so I don't really want to comment on that because I feel like any information that I say will be kind of misleading because, again, I don't have any experience with leopard gecko shedding. First off, let's talk enclosures. Now, I believe that a 10-gallon tank is not sufficient for a neurotypical adult leopard gecko. So there are also some physical disabilities such as metabolic bone disorder, which I'll of course get into later, that may make it more, I guess, like required that a leopard gecko has like a smaller tank and just easier accessibility to heat and hides and stuff. Now I know that saying that a 10-gallon tank is not sufficient may make some people very upset in the comments, but honestly, this is really important. 10 gallons is simply not enough room for a leopard gecko to live a comfortable life. And now I think that the bare minimum for a baby or juvenile leopard gecko is 15 gallons, and the bare minimum for an adult is 20 gallons. Now, when you get your tank, be sure that you're getting a 20-gallon long tank, as lots of vertical space is not needed. So, of course, like I said, leopard geckos cannot climb. Like they can't climb safely, I guess. And so, tanks for arboreal species, or arboreal geckos, such as the crested gecko, are a much taller and skinnier, I guess. And that's not needed or necessary. It's just not very practical. Now, inside the tank, there should be a minimum of 3 hides. This includes 1 dry hide on the warm side, 1 dry hide on the cool side, and 1 humid hide on the warm side. Now, I'll get into heating later in the video. Now, it is important to place your humid hide, which is a hide that stays wet all the time to help with shedding, on the warm side, as placing it on the cool side could lead to a respiratory infection. Beware though, the heat causes the water inside the hide to evaporate quickly, so you will need to spray it down with water at least once a day. And I choose to spray my hide down at night because that's when I do most of just my gecko care and just overall feeding and just my inspection of the tank. All right, so as far as substrates go, you have many options. There are 2 main categories of substrates, loose and I guess not loose. Some solid substrate options are paper towels, newspaper, tile, and reptile carpet. Most loose substrates are reptile soils. Now, some reptile soils can be harmful to leopard geckos, so be sure you're getting either a reptile safe soil, or you could actually take just like a gardening soil and make it reptile safe, but this has to be non-pesticides, organic, just plain dirt, and there's a whole sanitation process that you can actually watch a video about over on Jessica's Animal Friends, which is a super duper good channel. I would highly recommend checking it out. It's amazing. She's amazing. I just have great things to say all around for that. Now you may know someone who uses sand as a substrate and says it's totally fine, or you may have heard somewhere on the internet that it is totally fine, but please do not use sand. It can be very harmful to leopard geckos and it does cause impaction. There is lots of evidence from many studies that back this up, but please do not use sand as substrate. Now I'm going to try to move on from that topic, but it may make another appearance later in the video because that stuff makes me so angry. Anyway, let's move on. One of the coolest kinds of tanks, in my opinion, are bioactive tanks. I could talk all day about about how cool these types of tanks are, but I don't actually know very much about them. But I do know that there are other videos on YouTube that go into so much detail and explain everything so well. So if you're interested in going that route, I would highly encourage you to check those videos out. Just know if you are a beginner reptile owner, I would not necessarily recommend doing these because it's a lot of setup. It's generally better to start off with a simpler setup and work toward a more advanced setup. When I first got Spot, I just had very simple hides, very simple substrate. I just used paper towel. I used a heat mat. It was super duper simple, and then I worked my way up to a more naturalistic tank. I don't know if I'll ever go fully bioactive, but it was just not the route that I guess I decided to take. All right, now for heating. I'm gonna make this pretty simple and not go into huge detail about everything. So here goes. Leopard geckos self-regulate their body temperatures, which means they always need access to some sort of heat. They absorb most of their heat through their bellies, so under tank heating, or I guess sun-like heating devices, are usually best. There are multiple different kinds of heating devices that you can use to heat your tank, and these include a heat mat, which may have to be used in conjunction with a heat lamp if the ambient, or air, temperature is too cold, or a deep heat projector is another good option. This is what I'm using actually now in Spot's tank right there. And I'm not going to make this video about the deep heat projector. If you guys want another video about the deep heat projector, then I'm happy to make that. But I know that over on Leopard Gecko Talk, there is a lot of information about deep heat projectors, how to use them, how to install them, what they are. And there's also a lot of information on the Arcadia website, I'm pretty sure, about deep heat projectors. Now, all of these options are great as long as they do not have colored bulbs, as those can disrupt a leopard gecko's day-night cycle, and the heating needs to be on 24/7. All heating devices must be used with a thermostat, which controls the temperature of the device, and a thermometer, which basically measures the temperature in the spot where you put the probe. So my heating arrangement, basically, I don't know if you guys can see very well, but that is the bulb in a fixture. Then underneath, it's kind of glary on my tank, but there's actually a hide with some rocks built up to basically, I guess, provide him with a basking spot and belly heat, and the probe is between two rocks on top of the hide. So that's just kind of what my arrangement looks like, I guess. Another thing to consider is the reviews on any heating devices that you use, and do not buy used heating devices or cheap ones. Be sure that the places that you get both your thermostat and your heating devices from are reputable, and be sure that the thermostat is the right kind of device. Now, you should be able to tell from the website or another place online which kind of thermostat you should use for your specific heating device. If you get a crummy heating device, there is a greater chance that it will overheat at a random time, and this can burn your reptile or even start a fire. It can also fail, so in short, just check the brand and distributor that you get your heating devices from before purchasing them. Now, I know that I did not cover very much about what temperature you should set your thermostat or thermostats to, I guess. This is because the information is available all over the internet, and it is very easy to find out. Just be sure you search for leopard gecko temperatures specifically. And if you guys want a whole video, I guess, on temperatures and a lot more information on heating, I have a lot more information that I can give you guys. Just pop that in the comment section down below. Now on to humidity. Leopard geckos live in fairly humid places, so they do not need very much moisture in their tanks at all. Ideally, a leopard gecko's baseline humidity should be around 20 to 40%. This will fluctuate around different seasons and environmental changes, but it should always be around those levels. If the humidity in your tank is not in or near those levels, there are a couple of different ways to higher or lower your humidity. For Spot's tank, his humidity levels are a bit high at baseline, so I use a mini dehumidifier. While it does not work super well, it does lower the humidity by a few degrees, which is all he needs. Now this is what his little mini humidifier looks like. It's kind of, I don't know, this is the brand, it's I think called Eva Dry. I'm not quite sure, I just got it online, and it just brings the degree, or the percents, I guess, down a little bit. It doesn't help a whole lot, but it does help a little bit. And I would also, in conjunction to having that, if you have that, or if you don't, it's still really important to have a hygrometer. So this is super important to measure the humidity in your tank, so that you can make changes based on what that says, and so that you can just get a reading and get a feel for what your tank needs, if it needs, you know, the humidity raised or the humidity lowered. So of course the humid hide is going to be a bit more humid than the rest of the tank, and this is necessary for shedding. If the humidity levels in your tank are too low, I have some good news for you. It is very easy to fix. One thing that you can do is simply mist down your tank maybe once or twice a day, depending on your needs. Just make sure that you're not making anything moldy. If your tank needs a little bit more help than that, you can buy a humidifier and put it near your tank, or there are even reptile foggers that I'm pretty sure you can put in the actual tank, but don't quote me on that. Another thing you can do if your tank has too low humidity is switch to a loose substrate that holds humidity better. So this might mean a substrate that's used in more jungly tanks, or one that has more sphagnum moss in it, or eco-earth in it, or like, I guess just the eco-earth substrate holds a lot of humidity. That one I don't necessarily recommend for quite a few reasons, but a substrate like that, or one that has more cocoa fiber in it, That's just a couple of different ideas. So I know that the BioDude has some loose substrates that hold more or less moisture depending on your needs, so that might be something to check out. Actually, I have the BioDude's Terra Sahara substrate in my tank right now, and I love it. So far, it's been perfect, and I just have a lot of great things to say about it. Okay, so hopefully that was enough information about heating and humidity, and as I said, there is a lot of information out on the internet that you are also welcome to comment any questions that you may have down below in the comment section. On to lighting. Lighting, specifically UVB, is a heavily debated topic in the reptile community. Some people say that leopard geckos don't need it and it is harmful to them, while others say that it is beneficial. UVB definitely can be harmful if used incorrectly, but it can also be very beneficial if used correctly. UVB is one method of delivering vitamin D3 to your leopard gecko. You can also give your leopard gecko vitamin D3 through vitamins. If UVB is too strong, it can cause problems for your little guy, and if it is too weak and you are not supplementing with vitamins, your leopard gecko can develop MBD, or metabolic bone disorder. Metabolic bone, I think it's metabolic bone disease. I think it's metabolic bone disease, actually. So I'll get into that a little bit later. If you're going to use a UVB light, aim for around 5 to 7% for non-albino leopard geckos and 2 to 3% for albinos. Unlike heating devices, any above tank lighting should be turned off at night. This is because the leopard gecko has a day-night cycle, and it can be very intrusive, I guess, to their routine if it is turned off during the day and turned on at night. All right, so a good rule to follow is 12 hours on during the day and 12 hours off at night. Another type of lighting, and the last type that I'm going to talk about, is growth lights for plants, especially in bioactive tanks or tanks that just have live plants in them. As long as the lights are not too bright for your leopard gecko and do not emit any heat, or just a little bit is probably fine, then you should be fine just popping it on to your tank along with any over tank heating or lighting that you have. Just make sure not to keep it on overnight. For both UVB lighting and growth lights, I would strongly recommend buying a timer so that you make sure that it turns off at night and turns on in the morning. Now, as far as decorations go, there is so much that you can do with your tank. Many people go with the fake hide and plant look, which I think looks okay, and that's actually what I have in Spot's tank, or what I had, I guess, in Spot's tank. I have kind of an in-between. I don't have like a fully naturalistic look, but I also don't have a totally like fake look in there, I guess. I'm kind of in between a couple of different themes. But he actually just had an upgrade from his old tank to his new tank. So if you guys want a video about that and what I did and what products I bought and all kinds of stuff and what decorations I used, then I'm happy to make a video about that. Just make sure that the fake plants that you put in your tank are non-toxic and they don't have anything sharp on them or anything that your leopard gecko could possibly ingest. Also, always sanitize your decor and hides in the tank before using them, even if they are coming from a reptile store and they are for reptiles. You never know what is on those. Anyway, some people like the look of live plants better, which is also great. If you don't know which plants are safe for reptiles, then there's a really, really good video over on Leopard Gecko Talk that discusses which plants are safe for reptiles, and you guys should definitely watch that. These can look really good in a bioactive or naturalistic tank. And as far as backgrounds go, please do not go with foam. Foam backgrounds often come with tanks or are super cheap and tempting to buy, but they can cause so many problems. I originally had a foam background and my gecko kept climbing it, which put him at risk for internal bleeding if he fell, not to mention the awful noise of his claws digging into it. He was also able to get under it through the cutout for the thermostat and thermometer probes. It was just bad. So I do not recommend. There are many tutorials for DIY backgrounds on YouTube and other places on the internet, and these can be a hit or miss, to be honest. If you're going to do a DIY background, just make sure your leopard gecko always has a way to get down. This will lessen the risk of them falling and potentially getting hurt. Now, like I mentioned earlier, there are lots of choices for substrates. Obviously, some choices are going to look more aesthetic than others, but it is really up to you as long as you are not using any dangerous substrates such as sand or walnut shells. I actually forgot to mention earlier that the walnut shells are a really bad choice. I told you guys earlier that sand is a really bad choice, but walnut shells are also right up there with sand. Now, hides play a huge role in how your tank looks, as well as they take up a lot of space. Now, if you're going with a more naturalistic setup, you can make your hides out of rock, wood, cork bark, slate, any number of natural items. Just make sure that you properly sanitize them before use. There's lots of information about this on the internet, so I would definitely check that out. Now, I sanitized his cork bark basically by boiling it for, I can't remember how long, but I researched it, and I boiled it until basically all of the creatures will be dead. I don't really know how to say that, but yeah, I boiled all of the cork bark that I used in there to make sure that it was bug-free. Now, if you do not want to mess with your tank looking naturalistic, which I completely understand, then you can get plastic or resin hides pretty cheap at your local reptile shop or online. So to summarize, let me show you this quick sketch I made of an example tank. So this is the drawing that I made. It didn't show up great on camera, but I drew it so that you can see that there is a warm side and a cool side. The right side is the warm side and the left side is the cool side. And the part that has the lines going through that big box is like basically where the heat mat would go. And then the two thicker probes are the thermometer probes, and the one thinner probe is the thermostat probes. And then I put quite a few different hide/decor in there. I put basically the three main ones, which are the humid hide, the warm dry hide, and the cool dry hide. And then I just put a couple more just because I feel like it's important to give your gecko other places to hide, like outside of their three main hides. And I also put a little box that said heat bulb/lamp, and this depends on if you need the ambient air temperature to be raised or not. Now this is only one configuration of a potential tank. This is not something that you have to replicate, but I just thought that it would be nice to kind of show you guys just an example of what your tank could look like. So that's pretty much all I have for you on how to set up your leopard gecko's enclosure. Let's move on to feeding. So first off, let's talk about which feeder insects are good for leopard geckos and which are not. For a staple diet, the most common and recommended feeder insects are dubia roaches, mealworms, and crickets. Now, from what I've heard, dubia roaches are the most nutritious, then crickets, then mealworms. So this is just a chart that I found on dubiaroaches.com, and I thought it was really interesting because it breaks down each individual feeder insect into different categories, and basically you can average those categories, I guess, if you really wanted to, and see which one is the healthiest. But it shows all different kinds of feeder insects, and so I thought it was really cool, and I wanted to show you guys it. And if you want to screenshot this or go to dubiaroaches.com, then they have some really nice information there as well. As far as desserts go, waxworms are a good option. These should only be fed to leopard geckos once a week, or unless they are underweight, in which case they should be fed more often. Please do not give your healthy leopard gecko waxworms regularly. This is not healthy and can lead to them becoming overweight or developing waxworm addiction. Yes, this is a thing and can actually be very serious. Some leopard geckos refuse to eat any other foods other than waxworms if they are fed too often. Another thing that I want to talk about is pinky mice. Sometimes people will feed live or dead pinky mice, which are newborn mice, to their leopard gecko. Pinky mice are rarely appropriate size for a leopard gecko and are not healthy for them, so please do not do this. An appropriately sized insect is equal to or less than the space between a leopard gecko's eyes. If the insects you are feeding your leopard gecko are bigger than this, then you are putting your pet at risk for choking, which can be life-threatening. Now, I would highly recommend educating yourself on how to treat a choking gecko at some point, because who knows when it might come in handy. If you are wondering how many insects to feed your leopard gecko, I've got some good news for you. You simply feed your leopard gecko 2 insects per inch of its body length. This means from the nose to the base of the tail, not to the end. The number of insects may need to be altered as your leopard gecko gets bigger, so be prepared to do that. For babies, I would say maybe from 0 to 6 months, feed them every day. For juveniles, that would be ages 6 to 12 months, feed them every other day. And for adults, that would be ages 12 months or 1 year, and up, you can feed them every 3 to 4 days. There are a couple methods of feeding that you can choose from. What I like to do with Spot is I like to feed him insects one at a time, having him eat from my hand, or just simply dropping the insect in the tank in front of his face. Now, another method of feeding is called tong feeding. This is where you pinch the insect with tongs and let your gecko take it from that. This is a great way to feed your leopard gecko, especially if it has enigma syndrome, which I will explain later on in the video. Just make sure that you are using reptile-safe tongs and that there are no sharp parts. The last method of feeding that I'm going to talk about is feeding from a bowl. Now, from my experience with Spot, he will not eat out of a bowl. He does not even acknowledge that a bowl exists, and the times that I've tipped over the bowl on its side, I guess, and gotten him to eat out of it, he has gotten a face full of powder. The insect bowl has powder in it from dusting, which I will get into later, and he has gotten a couple of insects in one bite. This is not probably a super legitimate worry, but I'm always concerned that if I give him a bowl, he will choke on the insects. So this is not really a good option for me. If you really want to do this for your leopard gecko, I'm not saying that it's a bad way to go about feeding, I'm just saying it didn't work for Spot and I. So as far as nutrition goes, I'm definitely not an expert. I'm going to try to explain this the best that I can, but if you're looking for a super in-depth analysis of the different components of vitamins and minerals that leopard geckos need and how they balance each other out, then there are some really informative videos out there that I would definitely recommend checking out. But let's get into it. So the first thing that I wanted to cover is hyper and hypocalcemia. Hypercalcemia is when there is too much calcium in your leopard gecko's body. This can cause little squishy sacs to develop under the armpits, and if not fixed, can lead to other health problems. This is just a picture of a leopard gecko with calcium sacs, just so you guys can see what it looks like and watch out for it in your leopard gecko. Hypocalcemia is when a leopard gecko gets too little calcium. This can cause all sorts of problems, including MBD, which stands for metabolic bone disease. This can cause the bones to become deformed, which is painful for the leopard gecko. This is just a picture of a leopard gecko with very severe metabolic bone disease. And so it's very, very painful, especially if it's this severe, and it can cause mobility issues and all sorts of problems. Leopard geckos can self-regulate their calcium intake, so it is important to leave a bottle cap full of calcium, just pure calcium, no D3, added in their tanks at all times. Another way leopard geckos can get MBD is not getting enough vitamin D3 in their diet. Vitamin D3 can be delivered to a leopard gecko through a UVB light or through a vitamin powder, which is what I do. Calcium and vitamin D3 are just 2 of the many nutrients leopard geckos need. To supply your pet with the right amounts of every vitamin, you need to buy a supplement powder. Some people use a combination of vitamin and mineral supplements and calcium powder to create the right amount of nutrients. So there's many videos about this over on Leopard Gecko Talk. Personally, I use Hypocalcemia Plus, which is a calcium and vitamin and mineral supplement all in one. I got this idea from Jessica's Animal Friends. She's an amazing creator who has really good information, so please go check out her channel. Anyways, I leave a cap full of calcium powder in Spot's tank and use the Hypocalcemia Plus supplementing for dusting. You're probably wondering, what the heck is dusting? Dusting is basically coating your feeder insects in vitamins and minerals before feeding them to your leopard gecko. Now, I dust my feeder insects by taking a cap, basically a bottle cap that's about this big, I guess, and putting just a little bit of powder on the bottom, just a very small amount, but enough to add the insects into that cap, and then I usually shake it around with like a little covering on top of it, and just enough powder to kind of coat all those insects. And I do that for multiple feedings, and I switch it out every probably few weeks, I guess. And so that's basically what I do. Some people put it in a Ziploc bag, put their feeder insects in a Ziploc bag with a little bit of dusting. Different people do different things, and it's just whatever works for you, just as long as the feeder insects are dusted right before they're fed to your gecko. So that's all I have for feeding. Let's get into taming and handling. Okay, so for this next part, I got Spot out just so I can demonstrate a couple of things, because we're going to be talking about taming leopard geckos and also handling them. So buying a new pet can be scary, especially if you heard that the pet you're getting can drop its tail. But don't worry, I am here to calm all your new pet nerves. Sorry, that was very cheesy. Anyway, you should expect the first few weeks to be an adjustment period. Your gecko will most likely be pretty skittish and afraid. And how skittish and afraid and how long the adjustment period takes will all depend on the age of the leopard gecko, its background, any neurologic disorders it has, and just its overall personality. Speaking of age, I wanted to show you this picture as a visual of what different ages should look like in case you don't know how old your leopard gecko is when you get it. Now on the left we have a baby leopard gecko, in the middle we have a juvenile leopard gecko, and on the end we have an adult leopard gecko. Anyways, you should be able to expect to start handling your gecko anywhere from the first week to the first month. If you wait more than a month, you risk your leopard gecko becoming territorial, or just a little too comfortable. Now, before handling your leopard gecko, be sure to always sanitize or wash your hands with a neutral smelling soap or sanitizer. Now, I use this one. It's just your generic sanitizer that doesn't really smell. It's basically alcohol based, so it evaporates really quickly. So I wanted to say hi. But yeah, it's just kind of neutral. You don't want to overwhelm your gecko with any strong scents, like I said, but the reason that you should wash your hands before handling really any reptile is that humans can actually transfer germs to leopard geckos that are unsafe for them. Now, I have heard that the best way to pick up your leopard gecko is to scoop them from underneath, and that's what I do. So I'm kind of try to demonstrate, but I don't know how well it's going to go. I usually take my hand and I just scoop them from underneath like this, and he's a little bit, he's like, what are you doing to me? And then I just put them on my hand. And so that's just basically my little method. He's like, oh my gosh, what did you just say to me? So yeah. So if you try to pinch them to pick them up, then you risk squeezing their fragile bellies and causing internal bleeding. Plus, a well-tamed leopard gecko shouldn't mind a hand scooping them from under. Now, if your little guy runs off while you're trying to scoop them up, let them go and try again. Grabbing them while they run is just gonna make them more scared, and you can accidentally pinch their tail or even injure them. Now, once you've picked them up, just let them walk hand to hand. Now, this can be pretty fast, so be prepared. And also, don't forget to breathe. The last thing that you want to do is pass out and have your leopard gecko roaming free. Now, when you are done with holding your leopard gecko, just simply place your hand back in the tank and let them walk off. Now, I'm just going to do this to Spot because he's pretty much done with a little part in the video, but I basically just opened my tank up. Oh, my face kind of showed there a little bit. And I just let him go back in his tank, and he crawls off. He's taking a while. And he crawls off, and yeah, that's basically it. So if you're wondering what to do if your leopard gecko isn't ready to be handled, then there are some small things that you can do to make your pet more used to you. Now, leopard geckos have very sensitive noses, so introducing your smell to them early can make the taming process go a lot quicker, and once the leopard gecko is ready to be handled, it can be super smooth. So if the leopard gecko associates a certain smell with good things like food, then they will most likely not object to that smell scooping them up or petting them, for example. One way to scent train your leopard gecko is to hand feed it. Simply putting a dusted mealworm on your hand and letting your leopard gecko eat it can associate your smell with happiness. Another way to scent train your leopard gecko is to put an old item of clothing in their tank. And I've heard about multiple people doing this, but be careful. Leopard geckos often get into mischief with the core in their tank, so be sure the clothing cannot be eaten, and your leopard gecko cannot get tangled up in it. Also, make sure it's clean. Well, that wraps everything up. I can't think of anything else to talk about with regard to taming, so I only have one more topic to cover, so bear with me. Enigma syndrome. I have mentioned it earlier on in the video, but I wanted to elaborate more on it. It is something that is not talked about very much in the reptile community, but is such an important topic. Enigma syndrome, or ES, is a neurological or brain disorder. It is found only in the Enigma morph, so if you're wondering whether your leopard gecko has it, start by asking yourself, is my leopard gecko the Enigma morph? Enigma syndrome presents in many different ways. However, there are some more common symptoms that enigmas have. These symptoms include circling, wobbling, head tilting and bobbing, stargazing, twitching, trouble hunting insects, trouble shedding, having less aggressive instincts than a neurotypical leopard gecko, even when there is a potential threat, seizures, and in severe cases, death rolling. Death rolling is when an enigma syndrome becomes so dramatic that they end up on their back. Enigma syndrome can be so mild that the leopard gecko shows little or no symptoms, and it can also be extremely severe or anywhere in between. It's a scale. With severity comes more and worse symptoms and require more care. Many times, babies are born with mild symptoms that worsen as they get older. For both adults and babies, symptoms usually worsen with stress such as handling or breeding or being shipped in the mail. I have a short video to show you guys of a leopard gecko with pretty severe enigma syndrome being fed. So this was the video that I was talking about. It just shows a leopard gecko with pretty severe enigma syndrome trying to eat. As you can see, it gets pretty stressed out and backs up into a corner. Like I mentioned earlier, enigma syndrome is only found in leopard geckos who are the enigma morph. There are a couple of other neurological disorders that can be present in other morphs. For example, white and yellow syndrome, which is very similar to enigma syndrome, but it's found in the white and yellow morph. Now, I don't know very much about this. I don't know much about other neurological disorders. So other channels talk about that, so I'd definitely go check that out. So enigma syndrome is one of the most common neurological disorders, and so that's why I know the most about it. Now, I'm against breeding enigma leopard geckos because enigmas tend to have a much worse quality of life, and there is no way of knowing how bad an enigma symptoms are going to be before it is an adult. Breeders typically breed enigmas for their looks without considering how the leopard gecko's life will be. Now you're probably wondering, Elena, if I want to help this problem, what can I do? The number one thing you can do is not buy enigmas from breeders. I know that it seems tempting because you want to help a leopard gecko out, but you are just encouraging the problem. If you want to get an enigma leopard gecko, consider getting it from a reptile rescue. This way, you are not supporting an enigma breeder and you are helping a gecko in need. Let's say you bought an enigma, whether it's from a rescue or a breeder or somewhere else, it made your way into your house. Is the care the same as a neurotypical leopard gecko? Yes and no. If you still don't know how to tell whether your leopard gecko is an enigma, there's a video over on Jessica's Animal Friends that will be able to tell you whether your leopard gecko is or is not an enigma. So the care for a leopard gecko with mild enigma syndrome may not be different at all from a neurotypical leopard gecko. However, a leopard gecko with severe enigma syndrome will need special attention in some aspects of their life. First off, you should consider training your leopard gecko to eat from tongs, which is called tongue feeding, in case their symptoms get worse. This can happen because of stress or simply with age. Babies can show no symptoms of enigma syndrome, but develop it later in life. Another thing to consider when caring for an enigma is that they can fall easily from high places, especially if they have severe symptoms. This is because they do not have as much control over their bodies as a neurotypical leopard gecko would. Simple tanks are sometimes best, but it depends on the leopard gecko. Also, make sure that your shedding hide is always moist because enigmas tend to have trouble with shedding. You may also need to help them shed if they can't get the skin off. A shallow water bowl means less concern of drowning, so if your leopard gecko has a severe enigma syndrome, that might be something that you want to keep in mind. Another thing to be prepared for is that handling may not be an option depending on how severe your leopard gecko's enigma syndrome is. This can be a deal breaker for some people, but you don't want to be stuck with a leopard gecko you don't want. Lastly, leopard geckos with enigma syndrome need more attention in certain aspects of their life, so be prepared. So that is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I will try to answer as many as possible. I am currently working on remodeling Spot's tank more, so if you guys want a video of that, please let me know. Thank you for watching. Bye!